particularly with the looming of Ramadan bearing down upon us inexorably. The question of Ramadan and exams. And the other question is the question of May balls. Now, the May balls one is slightly mystifying because a lot of them presumably will be in Ramadan, which makes it a kind of double whammy for those who are trying to square the circle and to make it a Sharia-compliant kind of Muslim-friendly environment. But let's deal with that first. There's the fiqh of it, and then there is the meaning of it. And since we're living in a place where we have to explain ourselves all the time, and the consensus of society is against us, it's as well to figure out exactly why we have these restraints on our exuberance. The question is primarily, but not exclusively, one of alcohol. May balls cover a multitude of sins. And we might as well start off, I guess, by reflecting on the fact that we are not against the general form of what is often called integration, which we would probably call husn al-jiwar, being good neighbours. There's plenty of evidence for that in the seerah and the sunnah of Muslims and Jews in particular in Medina interacting in neighbourly ways. That is not a problem for us. We are not in favour of ghettoisation. We don't want to be on the fringes. However, Cambridge is a diverse place, and there is a spectrum of activities in terms of kind of axiology of values, and some of the things that we can get into here are very good for us and positive and challenge us and stretch us and are a da'wah opportunity. A lot of the students here get together to discuss serious things about global warming or the meaning of life or Everton Football Club or whatever else it might be. And those environments can be positive opportunities just to break perhaps certain parental strictures and to experience the diversity of humankind. And diversity is one of Allah's signs. اختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم, the difference of your colours and languages, which implies culture is Allah's signs. It's good to see how different sorts of people process reality. You learn to be grateful for the sunnah, you learn to be respectful of people who, even without revealed guidance, are trying to make a decent fist of their lives. It's a positive experience. And by and large, Muslim students here don't bury their heads in the sand. They do go out there and join all kinds of things, engage in sports activities, get into the life of the college, and generally I think it's a positive experience in which we're strengthened rather than threatened by engagement with the religious other. But there's a few things at the other end of the spectrum where we have to draw the line. Obviously there's certain forms of student behaviour here which are, from our perspective, and even from a universal moral perspective, are problematic. Haram relationships, cheating in exams, laziness, all kinds of other things that students very often get into that often affect their internal equilibrium and well-being, because vice has this worldly as well as next worldly consequences that we need to be aware of and also learn from, because the wise man learns from the mistakes of others as well as from his own mistakes. And so we can gain in our appreciation and gratitude for the Sharia. And Allah wants to make things easy for us. That verse that says that, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ, is actually right next to the verse in which Ramadan is required. We know that the dispensations, we'll get onto those in a moment. Allah does want us to have an easy life. And the reason why certain things are discouraged, makruh or haram, forbidden, is that they're not good for us. And there's something within us, the lower self, that says, oh, go on, just a little bit. Won't do any harm if I look at this website or watch that movie or hang out alone with this person of the opposite sex, just a little bit. But we just get a sense of what it's like, because the ambient culture is saying that this is the way to enlightenment and felicity. But the sunnah is there, in every case, for our protection. And let's learn that the easy way rather than the hard way, because I do see students who get into some catastrophic fixes and end up wishing that they just stuck with the boring old rules. They're there out of Allah's mercy, they're there for our protection. It doesn't benefit the divine infinity or totality to restrict us from doing things that are not harmful for us. Allah is not out to get us. So the issue of the Mayball, a lot of it is to do with alcohol, but it's also about what happens when alcohol is widely consumed and when students are letting their hair down after an exam, a lot of loss of inhibition. Now, ours is a religion where dignity and restraint are very important. The Holy Prophet says, لِكُلِّ دِينٍ خُلُقٍ وَخُلُقُ الْإِسْلَامِ الْحَيَاءِ. There is a particular quality or moral value that is a feature of each religion. And the khuluq, the moral value of Islam, is modesty, by which we mean self-restraint, dignity, self-possession, and not just kind of lowering the gaze, but modesty, hayat in its largest sense, which isn't that quality which we stereotypically associate just with women, because the Holy Prophet ﷺ was also a man of hayat. كان أشد حياء من البكر في خدرها. It's an interesting hadith. It says the Holy Prophet, it's a sound hadith, was more modest than a virgin in her tent. It doesn't seem to figure. A lot of non-Muslims think that's strange. Wasn't he this warrior with the sword, very virile? What is this modesty business? It is part of the non-negotiable basic metabolism of the believer that restraint and modesty is part of our dignity as descendants of Adam and Hawa, that which allows us to be bowed down to even potentially by the angels. So hayat and just dislike for obscene behaviour, ugly language, the kind of inappropriate behaviour of human beings who, for whatever reason, have let themselves slip. This is disappointing. It doesn't take them anywhere good. It doesn't do our species any credit. If it's associated with a particular nationality, it doesn't do that nationality any credit. Nobody really respects the drunkard. Nobody really respects the serial adulterer. Nobody really respects the one who's taking speed or ecstasy or sniffing coke or whatever it is. And these things are widespread. Nobody really regards that as part of noble human behaviour. In no culture are those things really respected, but the sign of somebody who's let himself or herself go. And we're supposed to have high standards, because we find in this our dignity and therefore our happiness. وَهَجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. The first commandments, the first revelations, pass them by in a beautiful way. No, it's not sneering and saying, I'm better than you, holier than thou. No, just in a dignified way. وَهَجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا. The Mayball and other expressions of sort of gilded Cambridge youths, hedonistic culture, the sense that somehow they've suffered so much at the hands of the academic system and the exams that they deserve to splurge, we don't actually follow that logic. In fact, generally people have been given a very privileged time for the 3 or the 4 or more years that they're here, and the idea that they then need to compensate with a party kicking their heels up is kind of mysterious compared to most universities in the world, most third world universities. Students here are well catered for. They're well fed and watered. If they have issues, there's somebody to look out for them. The college rooms are heated in the winter. I used to live in a university in Egypt, where I saw how probably most of the students of the world live. So rats at night and water in the bathroom between 2 and 4 every morning. The rest of the time the toilet stank and electricity was so dangerous that somebody in my corridor actually died from electrocution. That's how many universities are, and including universities in places where many of your forefathers will have come from. So we are already, without the experience of a little treat at the end of year 3, already treated pretty well, really privileged, really fortunate, and we need to bear that in mind, because self-pity is a natural human reaction. But even the examiners are not actually out to get you in some strange sounding way. They're actually out to help you. the whole place is there to help you and to put you on a good springboard from which to launch yourselves into possibly quite privileged and lucrative careers. So don't think that you've been in an Egyptian prison for 3 years. You've been, inshallah, having a good time. So this idea of the privileged English upper middle class youth, that they really suffered and now they need to relax and pop the champagne cork immediately after they come after their final exam and spray each other because they deserve that. No, they don't actually deserve it. They've been moralised. They've already had a great time. They've already been partying. So let them not feel sorry for themselves. Let them feel sorry for the refugees or most people in the world who really have suffered. So that's kind of the first thing. Do we really need that sort of cathartic treat for ourselves? No. The other thing is, of course, waste of money. These things are shockingly, scandalously, outrageously expensive. In fact, part of the attraction for some, talking to students, is that it's expensive. It must be really amazing if it costs £200 or £250. I'll never have this opportunity again. Life is just an opportunity to grab as many interesting experiences as possible. So I want to have this relationship, and I want to do base jumping, and I want to go to Australia, and I want to hike in Austria. I want to do all of this stuff before I get too old. It's not the believer's way. The believer knows it's going on and on for eternity, so he doesn't need to rush to collect things like a stamp collector. We don't have that experience. I haven't yet climbed the highest mountain in Europe, so I'm really going to try and do it this year. That is just a silly way of adding to one's stress by imposing ridiculous targets in life. And so the idea that, well, I'm only going to do it once and I want to see what it's like, and it's part of the Cambridge experience. Cambridge has many experiences to offer, and there's many that are much better. Go to the Shakespeare Festival and experience the depth of Shakespeare's soul as he deals with the range of human experience, and laugh and cry, and Richard III and Henry V, and that human drama in the beautiful setting of Clare Gardens or wherever. That's a better experience. And it costs 12 quid or something. You don't end up surrounded by people vomiting at 4 in the morning. Better? Presumably better, yes. I mean, I do this with my family every year. And sometime at around 9:23, just when Viola is finally being revealed, there's a kind of strange noise as my children are opening crisp packets because it's time to break the fast, and we annoy everybody around us. We do it every year. It's part of our Ramadan tradition. Better? Yeah, better. Cheaper, you learn more, better class of people, it's just a superior experience. It's also part of the great Cambridge experience. Better than being with a bunch of rich kids who are going to work for Deloitte, who are just vomiting over each other. That's better. Or listening to music that's going to do in your eardrums. That's just not our environment. We are, without being egotistic, just created for something better than that. That's not our natural habitat. So as well as the promiscuity and ambulances and all of the other stuff that happens, I talk to students, mostly non-Muslim, who go to these things. There is specifically the question of alcohol, which arises not just in the context of the Maypole, but sometimes in other contexts in Cambridge, and we need to be alert to it, because of course we don't recognise the conventional distinction, which is important in the ambient culture, between alcohol and other narcotics. For us, we can't figure out why you arrive at Heathrow, and if you're caught with one spliff in your bag, they immediately take you off and put you in hell, and it's a horrendous experience. But you get into, even in arrivals now, you can't even get out to see your loved ones before you pass about 24,000 bottles of vodka and brandy and whiskey, and they're desperate on their knees to get you to buy this stuff. This is a contradiction which we don't respect. Alcohol is a hard drug. It's on the poisons list. It accounts for maybe a third of NHS admissions. If you work at A&E at Addenbrooke's on a Saturday night, you see what it really does to human beings who are made for great things. human beings can do great things, that the thing that it does to the brain, to our inhibitions, to our dignity is a very foul and very disgusting thing. It's worse than what most narcotics will do. Hashish will just make you stupid, it won't make you start a fight. Alcohol is a serious thing. And the fact that everybody in this society, well, 80% of young people in England drink, the percentage is actually going down, interestingly. It's about 20% of young people in Britain who don't touch it. It's not generally known, because they can see what it does. My own experience of this was triggered at school, before I was a Muslim, when one of my friends at school had to leave school because his parents couldn't pay the fees because his father had become an alcoholic. And I heard all about it, and I saw it as the most disgusting thing, this dignified man just collapsing into a wreck, a ruin, a shadow of his former self. And that is very common. It is a monstrosity. It is a great evil. And we can't get around that just for the sake of appearing to be cool and not fanatical. Nowadays want to look like moderates, fine. Ours is the path of istiqamah, which really means moderation. But that doesn't mean that we should have a moderate view towards hard drugs. What could that be when you consider how much harm is done by alcohol? Just about every medical complaint in the book, from diabetes to heart disease to mental health to other things to Alzheimer's, is exacerbated by or sometimes triggered by alcohol consumption. But the first thing you do if you're admitted to hospital or you talk to your GP for the first time is, do you drink, how much do you drink, how many units? They know the effect that it has, so let's not soft pedal that. Part of the glory of Islam is that it keeps us free completely from that, keeps us free of it. Like most religions, and this is often not known, Hindus of the higher castes are not allowed to drink. If you're a Brahmin, you're teetotaler. Buddhists are not allowed to drink. The traditional Zen traditions of Japan, Amida Buddhism, there are other traditions, and they're not allowed to drink because they're also about dignity and restraint. No religion sanctions sort of fighting on King's Parade at 3 in the morning and frightening tourists and the other stuff that goes on that is sort of funny but not really funny. Christianity has had this long argument with itself about it. Actually, if you talk to somebody who's in New Testament studies in Cambridge and say, well, Jesus goes to parties, he goes to the wedding at Cana and they're drinking. He drinks. Oh yes, but in Roman Palestine, that would mean 1 part of wine to 40 parts of water. It was just a way of taking the often dubious taste of water away. Not possible that Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam could have become tipsy. It's not really a justification for consuming alcohol. But so many of them. What a tragedy. I was at a conference, the Catholic Theological Association. And the last evening, all of these priests drink a lot. And one of them told me afterwards that they went off to the local chemist to find something for their hangover the next morning. And this colleague of mine was saying, what's this thing that you give them? And she said, oh, it's what we always give the priests. Yeah, this is the problem they have, the whiskey priests. Read Graham Greene, they have this issue, and it's a terrible solitary source of suffering for so many of them. Alhamdulillah, Islam keeps us clean. Cold turkey, not even a little tiny bit, not even a drop of champagne in a chocolate. Cold turkey, alhamdulillah, that whole area of human nightmares is kept from us. I used to drink before I was a Muslim, and I know that 90% of it is about showing off, about being part of the group, about being tough at the bar, about your girlfriend. It's mostly about ego. It's not because it's actually nice to have 3 pints of beer and to feel a little bit like vomiting and not to be able to walk. That's really such a great experience to spend £10 on. It's not really worth the mystique of it. Anyway. So the Sharia also says what to do with, well, we know about passive smoking. Is there such a thing as passive drinking? Well, this is what we call majlis khamar, that is to say, to be at the table of people who are consuming alcohol. And there's hadith that say that you can't do that. Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir, whoever believes in Allah and the last day, then فَلْيَجْتَنِبْ مَجْلِسًا يُشْرَبُ عَلَيْهَا الْخَمْرُ. Let him avoid any session or gathering or group of people sitting together where alcohol is consumed. It's a hadith narrated by Imam Ahmad. You're not allowed to be in the majlis khamr. Many of the traditional authors of Sharia will say somebody who does that is considered to be somebody whose testimony can't be accepted in court. So we have, say in the Maliki madhab, which I'm a bit familiar with, we have three big early texts, and if you want to get a really good image of what the first three generations in Islam were actually like, these are the three texts from our perspective to go for: the Mawazir, the Mudawwana and the Utbiyya. And all of them have a big section on this business. So famous narrative which comes up again and again, Ibn Wahab, one of the great jurists of the early madhab, asked Imam Malik, سأل عن وليمة سأل عن رجل يدعى إلى وليمة يشرب فيها الخمر. Asked about a man who's invited to a walima, wedding party, in which alcohol is consumed, and he said, لا يجوز, he can't do that. Why? لأنه يظهر المنكر, because that is an occasion in which munkar, something evil, is being proclaimed. And here they talk about the takthir as-sawad. So when Ibn Battal, not the Maliki commentator on Bukhari, there was a big thing about this and exactly what it means to be with people who are consuming alcohol or some other narcotic. He says that if you were in a gathering, like in a crowd of people, some of whom are consuming alcohol or performing any other munkar act, you are considered to be part of that crowd. So if any divine punishment falls on that crowd, you're likely to be in the firing line. This is what they call takthir as-sawad. So for instance, a Moroccan friend of mine says some people in Morocco take their kids to the nudist beaches because they're easily accessible and they're nice. They say they're not going to look or strip off themselves, but they're just there for the children, they're not looking. You're actually increasing the popularity of those places. You're making them better known. You're implicitly validating them. You're not allowed to do that, even if you do succeed in not seeing anything at all. And this is again part of the wisdom of the Sharia, that if 5 people are gathering to sniff glue or something in an alleyway, in a housing estate, and then some other people think, well, this is really cool, let's hang out with them and talk to them because they sound really interesting when they're high, and then you get a bigger group and a bigger group, it somehow validates the practice itself because it turns it into a social occasion, a social event. So you are implicitly validating it just by hanging around near it. And that's why, for the Malikis, you're not allowed to do it. Imam Shafi'i has something very similar. And this is the general view of the Sharia. Occasional exceptions, so the ulama, particularly nowadays, will offer. So for instance, if you're visiting, say, a Catholic church as part of an interfaith conference, and you're sitting respectfully at the back, or it's a friend's wedding, or whatever, and there is, say they take communion as part of the service, so the priest is there with his cup and drinking the wine, that's not considered to be the majlis khamr, because you're not there for that, you're not implicitly increasing the number, because it's clear that you're an observer. More problematic is sometimes what happens at high table, when the professor of land economy has had 4 glasses of Madeira and his colleagues are starting to get a little bit worried and his conversation is even less interesting than usual. And well, I try to avoid that kind of setting, partly because these are usually people I respect and I don't like to see them in that condition. They are less than themselves. It's not interesting to listen to the company of human beings after they've had about 3 or 4 units of alcohol. They may find that their jokes are much more amusing than usual. Not really. It's just boring and kind of sad to see people doing that to themselves. So Occasionally, Pembroke College has this annual feast, and everybody is supposed to drink from this huge cup. Has anybody been at Pembroke and been to the Foundress's feast? They pass around this enormous gilded cup, and everybody's supposed to take a sip out of it. Well, sometimes with things like that, Allah is forgiving, you just kind of pass it on. It's not really what the event is about. So my teachers would say, the occasional sitting with people who happen to be drinking, but actually deliberately seeking out something where drink is really important and where people are really going to get sort of out of their minds on the stuff, is not something that the believer will seek out. It's not natural, it's not normal. So that is just my set of thoughts about that. This issue of alcohol is a major thing in Islam, and the ambient society hasn't really thought this through. So to go to, say, a crack house and to hang out with people who are smoking crack, and not to participate, but just because they're your friends and you like what they're saying when they're high, something that most people would regard as very strange and undesirable. If we consider alcohol also to be a serious vice, a serious narcotic, then we should, for consistency's sake, take the same view. So that's kind of the first issue. The other one is about Ramadan. And here again, the rule is pretty clear. I'm not aware of any major scholar who has said that to the list of the things that make it legitimate to break the fast and make it up later on, menstruation, sickness, pregnancy, whatever it might be, sometimes extreme heavy labour in the heat, say in a quarry, the ulama do have these dispensations. I'm not aware of anybody who has said that taking an exam can fall into that category. Somebody might correct me, but I've talked to ulama specifically about this because we've been wondering about this current scenario for several years now and trying to figure out if there's some way of dealing with it. It's really something that should be taken as a challenge, and remember that the Olympics took place in Ramadan, and a lot of Premier League footballers are Muslims and fast in Ramadan, and they make a point of it that they just keep going, and they want to show everybody that just through force of will and the strength of their personality that they can continue to play Premier League football or whatever it is, or to chuck a javelin, and for their performance not to be markedly impaired. There was a big thing about this when the London Olympics happened. A lot of journalists were saying, well, look at these silly Muslims, religion letting them down again. Actually, there was no single case of an athlete who clearly had suffered as a result of faithfully keeping the fast. Although you could say maybe they had more excuses for breaking the fast than we do, because how hard is it really just to sit in on the citric site and to move your hand for 3 hours? Well, compared to, say, running the 400 metres against some of the world's greats, it's not really so taxing. So again, let's get out of panic mode and self-pity mode, and remember the fact that there are many places in the world where people are enduring far sterner tests, like refugees, people suffering as displaced persons, people in war zones, too many of those places nowadays where they still faithfully try to fast despite extreme and sometimes mortal difficulties and mortal danger. But their situation is harder than our situation. Again, we're pretty pampered, pretty cosseted, pretty fortunate here. And to think, oh dear, it's such a long day, my blood sugar level will go down, my concentration will suffer, and so is not fasting, is really the wrong way to look at it. Get out of your immediate comfort zone of your friends and look at some of the things that are happening in the world. People drowning in the Mediterranean and suffering in refugee camps in Turkey where it's really hot. They're faithfully keeping up the fast. By and large, the Ummah does maintain the fast and treats it with the reverence that it deserves as a divine commandment. So this is something to bear in mind as well. Now I know that this, was it the Association of Teachers and Lecturers produced a rather odd report recently in which they said that they had consulted a team of Muslim scholars, and it seemed that Islam, as a reasonable moderate religion, might well sanction including fasting in that list of strenuous, might well include exams in that list of strenuous activities which might allow one to skip the fast and to do it later in the year. But I'm not aware of any significant scholar who has actually taken that position. People obviously consult their own conscience and consider their own metabolism, but as far as the scholars of the Ummah are concerned, it's pretty clear this is a challenge. And why not? Isn't the world full of people taking extreme physical challenges? Whenever I step out of my front door these days, there's somebody cycling past in lycra with goggles and he's challenging himself to something rather. Marathons, and base jumping, and climbing mountains, and deep sea diving, and parachuting, and everybody wants to test the limits of their metabolic endurance to prove something to themselves or to their friends, usually egotistic reasons. Well, this is actually less strenuous, less stressful. It is a physical challenge, not as painful as running a marathon with only a bottle of water in your hand. It's a moderate test, it's not an extreme test. And with sufficient discipline and a positive mindset, perfectly feasible to get through it all. Even for those poor benighted creatures doing something like engineering, where it's like wall-to-wall exams for weeks and weeks. Divinity, it's like 3 or 4 exams altogether, and they feel so sorry for themselves. And some faculties, it is something, it's just part of the test, and you will look back on that in later years with relief, hopefully not pride, but at least a sense of dignity in yourself as a believer for having met that challenge and not trying to get around Allah's regulations and violated the sanctity of the fasting month, which is an amazing month, which is full of blessings. And the night of power, we don't really want to miss those blessings. So let's just treat it as an endurance event, as a challenge, as a test. And hey, if they can do it at the Olympics and Premier League footballers, Mo Farah and those guys and refugees, do we really have the right to feel sorry for ourselves? A little bit, not much. So again, that's my thinking about the fasting in Ramadan issue. Now, of course, people who do have specific medical issues where they might well feel faint or pass out for whatever reason during the long fasting days, then obviously they have the dispensation and Allah wants things to be easy for them. But if there's no specific medical condition, I don't think that there's a rukhsah here. So those are the 2 issues that I've been asked to speak about. Anybody got any questions or corrections, perhaps? Yeah.
I want to ask about the travel during Ramadan. What counts as travel that allows you to break the fast?
It's the same as travel that allows you to join and shorten the prayers. So it's something like the distance between here and London would be equivalent to that. So I've known students, for instance, who travel that distance at the beginning of the exam season and then return to a hotel just outside the place where they're taking the exams and not fast. And they come in to the examination hall, take the exam, and then they go back to the hotel and they don't go back to their rooms, and they're considered to be fasting. It's the Ramadan hotel idea. Some people, I recommend.
I don't have an example. I'm asking about, so if I have like a travel outside of the UK, for instance.
Outside the UK, then you're not required to fast.
Yeah, but actually, when you get to the plane, it's not like really exhausting or anything.
No.
And then when you arrive to the place, do you still break the fast until you come back to the UK, even though it just like becomes as if you're in your own place?
People will do different things. I generally keep fasting if I'm taking an aeroplane because I don't experience it as a hardship particularly. unless I'm sort of flying long distance towards the west, in which case the day will get very long. But I don't really find that there's any need for breaking the fast if one is travelling outside the UK. But one is permitted to. It's not a sin. The hadith has the Holy Prophet and his companions travelling, and some of them broke the fast and some didn't. And it said that those who broke the fast found no fault in the others, and those who didn't break the fast found no fault in those who had broken it. So it's a matter of personal taste and conscience. Yeah.
With regards to alcohol or other things which are haram for us, a question I've had is whether we should approach these things through reason.
Mm-hmm.
I.e., it's bad for us, or it affects my liver, or a third of people, so and so things happen to them. Whether it's best to approach it through these reasons, or whether it's better to subordinate reason, not to dismiss it, but subordinate it to something else for which we abstain from these things. And because the converse can also be true. We may say there's a problem with pork, for instance, or with alcohol. But you find some other studies which say it's beneficial to some in some instances. So I wonder how you take reasons.
Well, I think in the case of alcohol, it's pretty clear. And there are rather pathetic counter-arguments by people who say that if you drink a glass of red wine every day, it reduces your chances of a heart attack. Neglect the fact that the sort of tannin which is in red wine isn't part of the alcoholic component, but can be found in grape juice, for instance. So they're really cheating. There's no significant medical argument in favour of alcohol consumption. Overwhelmingly, the evidence is the other way. In other areas, such as pork and so forth, maybe the scientific arguments are harder to find. But I began with the thought that because we're in an era of what the ulama were called ta'leel, people want reasons to explain to themselves as well as to explain to others. It's important to see the hikmah of the Sharia and that it is indeed there to protect us rather than just to give us an arbitrary set of hurdles which we have to jump across without really seeing the point of. Yeah. And it strengthens one's iman to see the obvious benefits of obedience to God. Yeah.
If you're part of a medical school or anything, or maybe part of an organization, you have a formal hall, or you're working. What are your thoughts on that? Because there will be alcohol consumption even if you do not drink. Would you then say better not to, if there's a conference, for example, there's a conference in 2 days and with your colleagues having dinner, there is alcohol being served at that table?
Well, as I said, sometimes for reasons of professional advancement, you just have to sit around at a table where people are drinking. Or in some situations, for instance, if you're a convert and you really want to win over your parents or your family or your brother to Islam, you can't do it by never sitting with them. So there's da'wah reasons under certain circumstances where the traditional prohibition can, according to my teachers, be suspended as long as we have in our hearts the sort of dislike of the thing, in the sense of why the thing is reprehensible, and use it as an opportunity to explain to people who are drinking why we're not drinking. It can be a da'wah opportunity. But generally I think it's best just to avoid that kind of long evening socialising at a college table, to find other ways of engaging with people when alcohol is not present. I think like Cambridge is difficult. And, some cultures, for instance like Japan, where alcohol is more or less indispensable to sealing a business deal, it's even harder for Muslims. But we have to do what we can. It's a lot easier here than it was. And there's also traditions of abstention, which are still kind of remembered. My own ancestors, for instance, and my grandfather's generation, took an oath in church on the family Bible, every man would put his hand on the Bible, swearing off the demon drink forever. He took the pledge. My grandfather was the last to do that. So it's not just Muslims, other denominations also have this teetotaler tradition. Plenty of people who respect it. Yeah.
Is there a ruling on fasting with regard to the old and the infirm?
Yeah. If fasting in any way is likely to exacerbate a medical condition, then one is not supposed to fast. It's actually sinful for sick people to fast, or for people who are pregnant, or nursing, or people who are sick to fast. So generally very old people who are infirm, although they often would really like to fast, they're generally exempted. No.
I'm not sure how accurate this is, but I once heard that if God's given you an exemption from something, for example, travelling, and you don't have to fast, it's actually good for you to take that kind of exemption because God's trying to make it easier for you. So to what extent would you say it's good to take something like that, but at the same time you could say, I'm going to fast anyway because I have that strong belief, and I think it's kind of...
I mean, this is dealt with in the hadith, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ أَن تُؤْتَى رُخَصُهُ كَمَا يُحِبُّ أَن تُؤْتَى عَزَائِمُهُ. Allah loves the concessions in His law to be availed of, to be taken, just as much as He loves the strict interpretation to be taken. So, I mean, for myself, I actually find it more strenuous and irksome if I'm flying EasyJet to Spain or something to break the fast, and then to have to figure out at some later point in the year I have to make it up, and just another thing to remember, and it might be just as irksome then just to go ahead and fast the day anyway, then I've done it, and don't need to book it in. So it's not necessarily the easy option to break the fast. And if you have a very busy day, often you don't notice the fast very much anyway. One finds fasting is largely a matter of psychology. Physiology of human beings is designed for sort of our ancestral prehistoric reality, living in small groups of hunter-gatherers where we would eat only irregularly. And somebody would kill a mammoth or something, people eat a lot for a day and then there'd be nothing for several days. It's actually quite good to have this intermittent fasting in our metabolic lives. It's a perfectly normal thing. So when we think we're really suffering, it's just because we want a treat or we need a cup of coffee or some kind of distraction. It's not because the body really needs it. It's not sending real panic signals. It's just asking for a bit of comfort. Yeah.
Would you regard caffeine as a harmful drug?
No, it's a stimulant, and stimulants, if they're not habit-forming, are generally permissible.
Yeah. I read some articles which talked about shortening the fast if they're above 18 hours per day. What's the understanding about that?
This is a fatwa that came in a rather absent-minded way from some Egyptian scholars recently, who basically swept in, courtesy of the European Fiqh Academy, and said, gosh, in Northern Europe we fast such a long time, therefore you can break the fast either at 6 p.m. or according to the nearest town, the schedule of the nearest town in the Muslim world. And then they swept off again, leaving complete confusion in their wake. So I know families who now are not united in their Ramadan, because some of them are breaking the fast in the mid-afternoon, some of them are waiting until iftar, and these are families who've been Muslims for centuries and always taken their iftar together, and now they're arguing about it, and something has been lost. So I think it's based on a misunderstanding. If those scholars come from Egypt, I used to fast in Egypt in the summer, and it was a lot harder than it is in England in the summer. It's just so hot, and life is so exhausting, and running for buses, it's very, very taxing there. So I wonder what they would make of it if we sent a delegation of our finest scholars to Cairo saying, gosh, it's so hot in Cairo, it's 45 degrees in the shade, and you have to squeeze up against all those fat people in the buses. Torment. We're going to give you this British fatwa that says in Egypt people break the fast at 3 p.m. every day, and then go back business class to Heathrow and leave the chaos behind us. They just don't know our circumstances. Of course, it has to be said, when you go really far north, sort of beyond Scotland, Scandinavia, then there is a stronger case for it, and exactly where you draw the line is really best left to the individual conscience. There's plenty of Muslims living north of the Arctic Circle now. So one of my favourite things in all of YouTube is this footage of people actually listening to a very beautiful recitation of Tarawih in a mosque in Iceland, and the sun is shining outside. That's what they do. What else can they do? They're really close to the Arctic Circle, so that's also acceptable. But I don't think that in the UK's latitude we have that dispensation. It's perfectly feasible to fast here from 3 in the morning until 9:30 at night. Even my mother-in-law can do it, so it's not superhuman achievement. Yeah.
I feel I want to comment about something you've mentioned with regard to students celebrating after exams. I do not subscribe to May balls at all, but I would say that I feel that if students feel really exhausted and they really want to celebrate after exams, then this is also healthy, even though there are many things, miseries happening in the world.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it doesn't mean that they are not achieving something or not contributing, but it's like a long journey to do so, and it's for their psychological health is also important.
Oh, no. There's nothing wrong with celebrating, but we have to find a context in which the celebration is real rather than chemically induced. Which is why I suggested Cambridge Shakespeare Festival. Maybe that's my generation and doesn't really get your sort of endorphin flow, but it's a nice experience. Anybody else? Yeah.
What's your opinion on restaurants which have a bring your own alcohol policy?
Well, it is an issue for a lot of Muslims who work in the restaurant trade, which was the basic source of income for really the first Muslims who came here in the 40s and 50s. The first mosque in either Oxford or Cambridge was above the, it was called the Curry Queen or something, which was on Beaumont Street in Oxford in the 1940s. It was an Indian restaurant. And the only place you could pray was in the room above it. But it was a restaurant that served alcohol. And really, there's a hadith that says that Allah curses the one who serves alcohol, the one to whom it is brought, and the one who carries it. And we need to take that seriously. And a lot of people who are in that trade are not comfortable with it, but there's no way in which they can avoid it because it's where the profit margin exists. I rode a taxi in Cambridge recently and the driver said, "Oh, I heard your khutbah in which you were talking about alcohol, and so I left my job as a waiter in a tandoori restaurant and I'm driving taxis." So I think he was happy with that decision. But it is a big fitna in the Muslim community that we are involved in the trades that are not a dignified, not a humane one. Inshallah, as the community gets ahead through people like you guys, you get into other careers where you have more options and you can forge a lifestyle for yourself that involves purely halal activities. Or maybe Indian food will go out of fashion. You can all go to a chicken spot instead on your road. Let's hope not. Or maybe there'll be a big cultural shift and alcohol will go the way of smoking. When I was a child in the 60s, everybody smoked all the time. Now you hardly see it. A few people furtively having a puff at the kitchen door of a restaurant outside, but it's more or less been banished. So maybe alcohol will go the same way. It's more harmful than smoking. Smoking again doesn't make you beat your wife or some of the other things that alcohol can do. Just lower your inhibitions. So it may well be that we're at the beginning of a big sea change. And we should be ahead of the pack. There should be a dawah possibility for us. We're not really using it as we should. Anyone else? No? Are we done? Are we out of time? The last bit organizers. Is it chucking out time, as they say in the pubs?
Okay, Jazakallah for coming, guys. We hope to see you at our next event, and inshallah. And thank you very much, Abdal-Hakim, for giving us a very good